Good morning and welcome to the Raben Report. I'm your host, Elliot Raben, so get ready to get triggered. Good morning and welcome to the Raben Report. I'm your host, Elliot Raben, and with me is my expert panel, as always, Amara, Samuel, and Jessica. How are you guys?
Sick.
Tired.
Great.
Great. Well, at least we got a mix of emotions today, as we all like it. Sorry to hear that you're sick, Jessica, but you are a trooper for being on the show. We haven't had to have any replacements this season, which is awesome. Any guests, whatnot. But let's get to the show. To begin, all opinions expressed are not those of Ryerson or Ryerson faculty and are only those of the individual commentators. Viewer discretion is advised. Let's start with our recap of the week. We're going to start in Toronto with U of T in the center of controversy once more, denying Jewish people or Jewish students kosher food because, according to them, it goes against the will of their members. So this is once again a case of conflating Israel with the government with its people. How do you feel, guys? I mean, I think Jews should be allowed to eat food that if they're observant Jews, they should be allowed to eat kosher food.
So the issue isn't necessarily that they're saying that kosher food is not allowed on campus. It's U of T's like cafeteria, right? If I'm not mistaken, serving kosher food. So I think, I don't know if I would say that people have a right to have their dietary preferences, like not preferences, restrictions, I guess, observed. Like if you were vegan, I don't necessarily think that you should complain that there's not vegan food, or if you're Muslim and have to eat halal food, I think, I don't think that's necessarily the responsibility of
Yeah,
UT.
but it comes down to the reasoning. The reasoning is that
I don't think the conversation should be about that. But
well, that's what it's become, right? And it's not even up to the student union to declare what food should be kosher or not. Ryerson just got kosher food, right? And again, it's not necessarily you're right, the university's job to provide all meal options for everybody, but when the conversation turns to, well, the group is pro-Israel, that's why Jews can't have proper food.
Well, I just think that's ridiculous. Like, it doesn't have anything to do with the topic, so I don't think that that's even the conversation. But yeah, like I said, I think it's not U of T's responsibility, but even if that were the reason, I think saying that just doesn't really make any sense from like a PR standpoint.
Yeah, there might be people that would benefit from implementing that, but don't necessarily support the group that advocated it for. Was it Hillel?
Yeah.
It was Hillel, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure there's Jewish people that aren't members of Hillel or necessarily like that group, but would still like kosher food on campus.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have friends that were actually part of the that kosher food drive. It was a drive in support of bringing kosher food to U of T, and I have friends who were actually part of that. So U of T has since apologized for that, but they haven't addressed the anti-Semitism that prevailed. So clearly just another day for the Jews.
I don't know, like, what is anti-Semitic?
The fact that Jews can't have kosher food because the group is pro-Israel. That was their statement.
Aren't
essentially.
you pro-Israel?
That doesn't mean that as a Jew I can't eat.
You can eat though. You just don't get to have food from like you're
But
not
the
entitled to U of T's cafeteria food.
But U of T should determine that based on if they can afford it, not based on political stances.
I agree, but I don't necessarily think that not having kosher food is anti-Semitic in itself.
Not having kosher food is not anti-Semitic, but the reasoning is anti-Semitic. The reasoning that because Hillel is pro-Israel, that Jews should not be allowed
it's highly
to have
political. I don't think I would
that's
call
the
that
problem. It is
anti-Semitism.
anti-Semitic because if Jews cannot have kosher food because the group is pro-Israel, there's no correlation. There's absolutely no correlation between the Israeli government and Judaism as a religion and Jewish dietary restrictions.
So then how is it anti-Semitic if there's no correlation?
Because they're making the correlation
How?
by saying that goes against the will of its members. So by having kosher food at U of T, it goes against the will of the members of the U of T
I
student
thought
union.
it was bringing the motion forward when it went against the will because they were pro-Israel. Because you said like the students union doesn't decide if there's like they don't decide that, do they?
They don't have no. They wouldn't.
So they would just like
They-
bring the motion forward to have kosher food.
Right.
in the
Has to get it
cafeteria. So I
right.
think that's what
higher
it
up
was.
approval.
That and that's the problem though, and let alone U of T has a whole committee dedicated to BDS, which is anti-Semitic in itself. But
I
the fact,
disagree.
well, BDS, you understand what BDS is, obviously, or do
Yeah,
you?
well, yeah, I don't. Maybe not as
Yeah,
much as you do, but I think
but
I do.
but
yeah.
just the mere fact it's the only university that has that policy. Even though Canada has made it, has said they won't support anybody with that give funds to anybody who supports BDS. But let alone going back to the original topic, the fact that U of T student union is conflating the Israeli government with Jewish dietary restrictions is a massive problem. There's been outrage everywhere. So I just think it's a major issue. It's personal to me, not that I am kosher, but it's just a matter of it's discrimination. It goes against their anti-discrimination policy, U of T's own anti-discrimination.
Well, is it discrimination because they don't have kosher food, or is it discrimination because they don't want to bring the motion forth to have kosher food because the group that wants to do it is pro-Israel? Is that the discrimination?
That one. It's
So
not
then
discrimination
being
because...
pro-Israel isn't a protected status, though. So,
But
where's
being
the
pro-Israel
discrimination?
has nothing to do with being able to eat food.
I agree, but I don't think it's discrimination. I
It
think
is.
it's just.
It is because they're conflating the two.
But that's not
you-
discrimination.
It
It's like a
is.
protected groups, like according to the Constitution. And being pro-Israel is
Jew-
not a protected group.
Jews
There's
are a protected
16
group.
rounds.
But Jews aren't pro-Israel. Like not all being a Jew does not necessarily mean.
Exactly. That's the point. But that's what U of T is conflating. They're conflating that because all Jews are apparently pro-Israel, they can't have kosher food. That's the problem.
I think it was the. Well, I
don't
think
think they
okay.
ever said that.
I think these are like
They're two separate
issues
subjects.
because I think the
but
fact
U-
that they. Sorry. I
But
think
U
the
of
fact
T is
that they-
conflating the two. That's the problem.
I think the students
problem.
union doing that is messed up. But
Exactly. That's all. That's the whole point I'm trying to make. Kosher food in itself is not a right that students should have. But the problem with U of T conflating the Israeli government policies or being pro-Israel with the ability to eat food is a problem. I would think that. Does nobody else, Sam?
Yeah. I mean, to my understanding, people that live on residence, if I remember my time at U of T correctly, it was required that you have the meal plan. So I imagine there's at least a small population that has to eat at the cafeteria or pays a lot of money to have that meal plan. Why wouldn't they be
Yeah.
able to eat kosher food?
Yeah. Well, let's move on to the. We're just going to stay in Ontario, but we're going to talk about the new teachers' strike that's upcoming with the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation. They are planning another strike, and the Minister of Education has said that the one thing that unites the Ford government, the Liberals, the New Democrats, Bob Rae, is teachers striking. Because everybody has experienced that. Amara, you're shaking your head. Tell
Yeah,
us.
there have been a lot of strikes, and the elementary school teachers I think voted to strike as well as I think Catholic school teachers as well. So it's like not a good situation right now. I think there have been strikes throughout all of these governments, but I think the volume of the strikes says something about Doug Ford's government, and especially in relation to education.
Well, because they know, at least I think they're hoping that that people will see their strikes as more justified, because I think it's very popular to...
I think they are more justified than they were in the past.
Sure, but I'm just saying it from the union's perspective. They can push forward more strikes because they'll think they get more sympathy from voters and the general public because, you can just assume that Ford is unreasonable so that the strikes are more common. They should make public, like, that union or that sector, what's it called, a mandatory service, so they can limit their ability to go on strikes. I think it's ridiculous. The teachers have so many great benefits, and almost a quarter of the year they get off.
I don't think the teachers' unions are necessarily like these benevolent organizations that are looking out for students and not themselves
And
at
a
all.
lot of teachers disagree with the position.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say that, but I
mean-
do think that Doug Ford's treated them pretty awfully, especially compared to past premiers.
Look at what he's doing to our students and our young population. And yeah, most teachers, I'm not saying all, there's some bad teachers, but most teachers are in it for the betterment and the education of our youth, and if they're going to be greatly affected by the cuts and not being able to graduate in some situations, then yeah, the teachers are going to strike on not only on their behalf, on like the teachers, rights to get what they're entitled to, but also on the behalf of students and their right to have a good and stable education, one where there's not cuts to liberal arts and there's not cuts to areas that are vital for the betterment and education of our future.
I completely agree with the issue with cuts to certain parts of education, like liberal arts, right? I mean, Jessica, you and I.
Agree with the
no,
cuts
like
to those
with that, there's a
areas?
problem with it. That's what I mean. Sorry,
Okay.
I agree that shouldn't be cut. But what my question is now, just like everybody else, teachers have jobs. Is it fair that teachers have a problem with job cuts, whereas other forms of employment, they don't have the ability to protest job cuts? Or
It's not the issue that we're really discussing right now. It's not.
Well, one of their issues is job cuts.
I know, but it's not that, because other areas and other sectors in the business world, they experience job cuts, teachers should be able to. The teachers, they should experience it too, because all other individuals experience it as well. That's not the issue that we're talking about necessarily. Just because other sectors experience it doesn't mean that every sector possible should experience it. Nobody really in a pure world should experience things like losing your job, especially after you've gained seniority and things like that. But that's also what comes into why teachers are unionized and why other private sector areas or public sectors, more or less, are unionized, is to protect those job cuts. And teachers still do experience it. It comes down to, the whole seniority spectrum. So just because, other areas experience it more doesn't mean that teachers should experience it more. And yeah, if they're unionized, then they should fight to have that as minimal as possible. Private sector is not going to necessarily have that, because a majority of those areas, like let's say a law firm example, they're not unionized. Lawyers aren't unionized. They legally can't be, I don't believe. But if they experience job cuts and loss in partnership and things like that, that's the way that the private sector works. Teachers are unionized. Teachers will probably always be unionized. Other areas of work that are unionized, they're going to have protections put in place to protect against losing jobs and losing seniority and losing things like that. And so that's not an issue at all. It's a positive that they have that ability. And I think that it encourages stability within our teaching sector, to know that these people have some form of job security and they're not just going to be uprooted and lost, and which would have a detrimental effect again on our youth.
Well, what I'm asking though is not necessarily that teachers should experience all these job cuts, but why should they be excluded from experiencing job cuts?
Because one, like again, they're unionized. Most unionized divisions have that protection. But not only that, they're unionized so that there's stability within our education system, and our education and healthcare systems are the most vital backbone to our society, and it's what you don't cut first. There's other areas in which you can cut, and you do not cut healthcare and you do not cut education. Education is the basis for our youth, and education is where we create jobs and where we can create different developmental sectors within our society. And education is a right. The Education Act states that. And, in order to have that right, you're going to have individuals who are qualified and educated to be able to teach our future generations.
But is having a job in the union a right?
So I think, going to your original question, it's because other professions aren't unionized the way teachers are, is why they can't fight as hard. And I do think people obviously have negative opinions towards teachers because they get summers off and they have good salaries and pensions and stuff like that, and their hours aren't as maybe long as anyone else's, but they're doing a really important job. Like if you have a child that's in school, they spend more time with their teacher than they do with you. So I don't think that we should necessarily give teachers whatever they want all of the time, but they are really important. They're also educating the next generation of leaders.
And I think the idea, sorry to interrupt you, I think the idea that they don't work as hard, they don't work as long as hours, I think that's kind of a myth. A lot of the time they're in an hour or 2 hours, like the teachers that I know, before the bell rings, and then they're there either after school ends, doing either after school programs or just contributing to marking, as well as after school tutoring programs. So the teacher, I mean, I'm not saying that every teacher, there's a lot of horrible teachers out there, and I think a lot of us have experienced that personally, but I don't think that's the majority. And I think a lot of them are there for the betterment of child development and education, and they will put in the extra hours, and they will put in a lot more than what is union
Necessary.
required and what is necessary, and they'll stay after school, and they'll put in more time to make sure that each student is getting a fair and equal chance, and they're getting, you know, the education that they're entitled to. So the idea that, oh, they only work 9 to 5, that's, you know, when they have summers off, I think that's, you know, besides the summers off thing, which I think they're entitled to and they deserve. I mean, that's a lot. That's really exhausting work. The argument that they don't work as hard or they don't work as long as some individuals in the private sector is false.
Do you think that they asked for too much, or that they're?
I don't think so.
Do we know what they're asking for? Has anyone
They asked for
looked
a
into
pay
what they
raise
want?
that's in like coincides with inflation based on their past salaries, which is pretty good, as well as to maintain. I mean, they lost sick days; they're not allowed to bank sick days anymore. So before, you know, teachers would take early retirement because they would just
Yeah.
never take their sick days, and then they would have like a couple years of sick days stocked up,
Mm-hmm.
and then they would they would retire at like 63 instead of 65. And they'd still be in the payroll and everything because they're just using their sick
Yeah,
days.
so they're still getting paid.
So I think, I mean, I feel like that might have been a little bit an abuse of the system. And so, I mean, there's arguments for that either way. I still think that they were entitled to those sick days. And if there wasn't anything stopping people from doing that, then, you know, people are going to do what they want to do. Now, sick days, you get a certain amount allotted each year and you can't bank them, which I guess also encourages people to take them. So you're not going to have as much loyalty within coming to work every day. So again, arguments on each side of the thing, each side of the spectrum. But no, they're not asking for much. They're asking for stability, and they're asking for mainly the cuts that Doug Ford's government is implementing, not to greatly adversify our youth.
I feel like there's so much of a conflation with like what you were saying about it being it looking good for them to strike. I think that happens a lot too, because obviously the strike, like the education cuts, not really anybody agrees with them, especially for the special needs programs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that gets to be conflated with like what they want for themselves as well in the strike. Do you know what I mean? So I feel like Doug Ford gave them a really good opportunity to bargain hard, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's move on to. So, do you think there's going to be a strike? Do you think?
Yeah.
Do you think so?
Probably. I mean, I would support a strike. I think anything against Doug Ford is needed. So,
Sam?
Yeah, they'll probably strike. I think people's goodwill is running out, and yeah, I think attitudes towards teachers will probably change.
for the good or bad.
I feel like they've always been pretty negative.
Mm-hmm.
Like I remember
I
my
think they're
parents not
becoming
liking
more
teachers.
negative.
I
I
think
don't
The
know.
last like 5 years.
Listen, if you talk to any teacher, like my sister's a teacher, you talk to anybody, like they're not going to deny that every time the teacher union has striked, it's been for good grounds. I mean, there's been a lot of like kind of okay, you know, probably shouldn't have gone on strike for that, but they did. But the common consensus about this one in particular is that they have a lot of support from the general public, and there are solid grounds to be able to go on strike. And there's reason to. It's not like, oh, we're just in it for whatever kind of fluff that kind of had some iffy backbone to it. But this one, there's a lot of severity at risk. There's a lot. It's a very serious thing that's going on, and there's not just the support from the teachers union, which not a lot of the time, you know, some of the teachers don't even support. It's support from all angles. So you have your teachers, and you have, you know, your QB workers, and
Right.
as well you have public
Yeah.
consensus.
So clearly the consensus is that there most likely is going to be a strike. But let's move on to our final update of the week, which is that Chick-fil-A has halted donations to two Christian charities that have been or are anti or don't support same-sex marriage. What do you think of that?
I mean, I don't really have any opinions on it. That was obviously a big issue for them. There was a lot of protests when the Chick-fil-A opened in Toronto, and they decided to stop donating to those organizations. I don't really like. They,
What they
you know,
tell you.
Sorry?
I don't know. I don't think anybody should really support that organization. They've done it for so long, and that's been like the backbone of their business. Is close on Sundays. We're a Catholic business, and we're going to donate to organizations that harm LGBTQ communities. I think the whole reason why they stopped is because there'd been an uproar. But if there wasn't an uproar, and even there's been uproar for quite some time, and they had no plans to do anything about it. So they say now that they're going to stop and they're going to halt donations, but that doesn't mean that, somewhere in the books that they're still going to be donating it. And the CFO and CEO and the leaders of that corporation, they're still, based in homophobia. So I don't know, if you really do support the LGBTQ community, I don't really see how you could support that organization still, regardless of the fact that they've stopped allegedly donating.
Do you think, though, that aside from the anti-LGBTQ part, when you mentioned closed on Sundays Catholic organization, do you think that's a problem for a company?
I don't think it's a problem for a company. I think it's a problem when they use their religious views to harm minorities.
Yeah, I think they can do what they want. I mean, they're making less money by not being open on Sunday. So if they decide to do that, that's their right. And I think I don't really know how much obviously there was a difference that was made because they decided to stop donating, but I don't know if it's fair to say that if you support the LGBTQ community, especially now, you can't go there, because I don't know, if we really looked at all of the businesses that we give money to every day, I'm sure that most of them have some problematic views or donations.
I'm sure,
and stuff
but
like
if
that.
you're totally aware and you 100% know that Chick-fil-A is supporting these organizations, and first off, in Toronto, especially a lot of Ryerson students, it's really out of your way to go there. So go to McDonald's, go somewhere else, which there's controversy around them as well.
Chick-fil-A is 100 times better than McDonald's. That's the difference.
Okay,
Yeah.
Also,
of course you eat there, but anyway,
the novelty of an American fast
I've
food
gone
chain here.
twice, and it was wonderful.
But here's the thing. I also
would go
know
again.
I know people who are gay who identify as LGBTQ that eat at Chick-fil-A. What do you say
Well,
about that?
There are
Listen.
things that have happened that have been not the nicest to Black people, and I know a lot of people, or me myself. I can't think of anything off it.
And the
Justin
people
Trudeau,
that
I'm
you
sure a lot
know,
of Black people voted for
I
him.
know
and-
who you're referring to, and you can't base the whole entire universe's LGBTQ
No,
community
that's not what I'm
based on
doing.
two individuals.
But your
It's-
statement was that anybody who goes there doesn't support LGBTQ. That's what
I
I'm
think
saying.
no.
So
I'm not saying that they don't support them. I think that it's it's an ethical choice to not go there and not to go to an organization where supports organizations that are discriminatory to our LGBT communities. So it's not a difficult choice to say, no, I'm not going to go there. I'm going to spend my money somewhere else. And you can use that argument for anything. No, I'm not going to go to H&M because it's fast fashion and it's bad for the environment. I'm going to go to a more sustainable and environmentally friendly corporation. You can use that argument for anything. It comes down to the ethical and easy choices that you can implement into your daily life. So, I mean, I'm not saying that LGBT members are going to Chick-fil-A and they're not supporting their communities. I mean, I don't think that it is a good way to put your money, a good place to put your money if you're especially part of that community and you know the controversy behind it. But that's not just, I think that's for anybody. If you're aware of what this corporation does and the views that they hold, ethically, and Samuel, you like this, morally speaking, you shouldn't go, you shouldn't support, and you shouldn't spend money
I think that's a
and
pretty
give your
high.
money to those organizations.
I think it's a pretty high standard to have because
It's not that hard.
no, because
To say I'm not going to spend $5 on a chicken sandwich.
it's a very good chicken sandwich. But the lithium in your laptop, I'm sure at some point was extracted using exploitative labor in East Asia. Does that mean we shouldn't?
I said simple choices that
That's
can
a very
help
simple
you in
choice. So you could
So I can't use any laptop, and I'm not
Why
going to
not?
be able to have any contact with our very high, fast-paced and technology-connected world. I can't use a laptop. I'm saying, even when we had this conversation on environmentalism and things like that, yeah, it's hard to make huge environmental impacts, and we're not going to, even if we, slowly stop using our fossil fuel industries and we start going into more green technology, that'd be a long process to get away from the damage that we're doing. But it comes down, and this is the over-encompassing thing with anything, in my view, is if you can make little changes within your life that have some sort of impact realistically and logically, then why shouldn't you be able to do that? Buying a computer, yeah, there's going to be there's probably going to be environmental impacts of it, or, ethical impacts of it. Even when, one day this computer stops working and I throw it out, there's going to be environmental implications. Unfortunately, you have to go, that's something that is considered a necessity in today's day and age. So you have to find other areas where you can kind of contribute environmentally, globally, ethically, whatever, to systems and to organizations that will have some sort of positive impact on the world that we're living in. Not everybody out there can do every single thing possible realistically, as much as, I personally would love to, and a lot of people would love to, realistically, you can't, regardless of, let's say your socioeconomic status or just social status or whatever, you can't do everything humanly possible to make some detrimental or, big impact change.
Right. Well, it's still going to be an issue for some people, while others will continue to eat at Chick-fil-A regardless.
And that's with anything.
Yeah, exactly. But let's move on to finally our main story, which is police brutality. Police brutality is defined as the use of excessive physical assault or verbal assault during police procedures, such as apprehending or interrogating a suspect. Deadly force is not always excessive force. However, when deadly force exceeds the force that is necessary to create a safe environment, it is considered police brutality. In the past few years, the subject has become far more prominent in the media with the inception of the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States, followed by one in Canada. The topic has come to light once more following a news article reported recently, this week, actually, that a Toronto police officer and his brother were jointly charged with aggravated assault in the incident that eventually caused Defonte Miller to lose his left eye back in 2016. They were also separately charged with obstruction of justice for the way they portrayed the incident to investigators. On today's show, we talk about the inner workings of policing in Canada and racial bias. Does it exist? And if so, how can we combat it? As a reminder, we are live on Facebook, so make sure to comment on our feed to have your thoughts read live on air. So we're going to start with our Facebook poll, and we asked our viewers whether they thought systemic racism, whether there is systemic racism in policing. Now, we had 104 respondents, actually, which is amazing. So thank you to everybody that responded. And of that, 81 people said that yes, there is systemic racism in policing, and 23 people said no. Percentage-wise, that would be, let's see, I can't really, 78% and 22% no. 78% yes, 22% no. What are your guys' thoughts?
So is there systemic racism in policing?
In policing, yeah.
So in Canada, we actually don't, or it might not be, it might just be Toronto, but I think it's all of Canada in terms of the justice system and stuff. And I know Toronto police don't keep racial statistics, so you can't actually use the police stats a lot or easily to see if there's a racial disparity. But I'm looking at a study done, and it said that he reviewed Special Investigations Unit investigations between 2013 and 2017 and used notes, photographs, and reports to identify the race of the individuals involved. And Black people are overrepresented, at least in Toronto, from what this says in police investigations and just interactions with police. So, and I think just overall, it's kind of clear that there is there is systemic racism in policing. Black people in the States as well tend to be overrepresented in policing and get, harsher sentences and stuff like that when they do get to court.
Mm-hmm.
Sam?
Yeah, I'm sure police have biases, especially with how they approach people based on their previous encounters. Again, it's very, like Amara said, it's very difficult to get this type of information because precincts in Canada don't like to even use racial descriptions when describing suspects, so you can imagine that aggregate data would not be as detailed as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say bias is definitely based on previous experience or the experience of their coworkers would affect how they approach certain types of people, yeah.
Do you think that police officers differ from the general public? Are they held to a higher standard in Canada?
Do you mean higher standard than cops in the States or higher standard than civilians?
Than civilians?
Yeah. And I think they should be. They are given authority. Canada does not have, like most people don't have guns. It's not as big of a deal here in the States just to like personally own a gun. So most of the times cops are the only ones in their interactions with weapons like firearms, and they have the authority to detain you, to arrest you, to literally like take your liberty away. So I think they are held to a higher standard, and they absolutely should be.
Yeah, that's infringing on a human right there. So yeah, illegal imprisonment.
Well, so in terms of racial bias and such, how do an officer's personal values influence the way they enforce the law?
Well, I hope that nobody's like has racist personal values, but it's clear that, I mean, obviously some people do. If you have racist ideas yourself, you're probably going, like those are probably going to color the way that you police. Yeah. So if you have an idea that black people, usually black men especially, are criminals or are dangerous, then you're probably going to be more aggressive or at least more suspicious of them in your work as a police officer than you would with other people.
Mm-hmm.
Sam?
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that.
Well, in going back again once more to racial bias, how does age, gender, socioeconomic class, and race affect police? You talked about a little about prejudice and the way they judge, but is there training in place that can change their views? Like, I know there's sensitivity training and whatnot. Do you think that really has an impact on policing? Do you think that it should be mandatory? Do you think it works?
I don't know if it works. I do think it should be mandatory, which is kind of a contradiction. But I think that they should definitely be paying attention to sensitivity. And you don't really have to be sensitive to racial. You just don't have to be racist. Like, you don't really have to be sensitive to visible minorities when policing them. You just kind of like police them the same way that you would police anybody else. And I think like this kind of can connect to the whole Don Cherry controversy. A lot of people are saying he's 85, he's old, he says things. If you have somebody like that policing, probably not many 85-year-old cops, but older people, I'm sure that can affect them. And I think they should definitely be, as much as the police organizations can, should try to keep them up to date, I guess, with the world and society.
Mm-hmm. Sam?
I think the only thing they should be aware of is maybe the type of neighborhood they're going into. If there's a greater propensity for violence, maybe their behavior might change. Maybe they're more cautious. But like on an individual basis, you can't eliminate the biases that an individual might have, even if we hold police officers to a higher standard, which I believe we should. I guess there could be training that could be done, but I think it's only human that they would form those biases, yeah.
Now, you said it depends on the communities they're going into. So let's talk about community policing. What are your thoughts on that form of policing? Do you think it works? Do you think that it is racist? Do you think that...
How would it be racist?
Based on the neighborhoods.
Like if you have a black cop policing a black neighborhood?
Or just more cops in a certain neighborhood?
Well, that's not necessarily community policing. That's like the issue with people say black neighborhoods are over-policed because, cops are just there more often, which could also contribute to the over-representation of black people in crime stats. But I think community policing in general, like having somebody who maybe not is necessarily from that community, but from a community like it or is familiar with the community, would be effective because I think there's a very big barrier between cops and civilians right now. And I think bridging that by having a sense of community between them would help with a lot of the confrontations that we see happening.
So would that be done by officers maybe, I don't know how they patrol around the city now, what jurisdiction they have, but would that be done by, say, an officer staying in a certain area for a longer period of time or in excess of years so they get to know their community?
Or maybe, instead of just patrolling like in a car talking to the community, if you have like, for example, like a Toronto police officer who's from a certain community, maybe having them police that community instead of another one, I think something like that would be effective.
Now, in general, how do citizens view police and vice versa? Is it a positive view of police? Is it a negative view?
I think we've obviously seen that the Canadian police aren't as violent, or they don't have the likelihood that they use violence is a lot less in the States. And we discussed earlier before the show started how the number of fatalities involved in shootings in Canada is significantly lower per capita than the U.S. So I think maybe a lot of that distrust could be that Canadians are engrossed in U.S. media and the shootings that happen there and the police brutality that happens there. And they may apply that same descriptor towards Canadian police, which I don't think is apropos. Like, I've never had a negative interaction with the police, and I don't
think it's you that would be having negative
I knew
interactions
the
with
second I
police.
was going to say that.
The truth.
But I even if I try to recall myself, I don't remember seeing many stories about police brutality outside a couple instances within Toronto in the last decade. But I think people should be not distrustful, but they should be wary of police in the sense that I think it's likely that they could infringe on your rights, and I think there's more than enough evidence that they will if they think they can get away with it. And I think that's responsible. It's the responsibility of citizens to know their rights and to not be taken advantage of. I think that's important.
I agree with the knowing your rights. But I think that genuinely, in terms of like distrust with police, me personally, I've never had a negative interaction with cops, but my brother has. So I think it does depend on, as much as I hate identity, like going into politics, I think it does depend on your identity, because I think Black men are more likely to have negative interactions with cops than Black women or other races. Like,
Why
I
do
know,
you think that is?
because I think their police hold biases towards Black men. I think that they're
Systemic.
more likely to be criminals and doing bad things. Like, I know my father and my brother have both had negative interactions with police, and they're not criminals and weren't committing crimes at those times. So I think the racial bias is probably why minority communities don't have a good.
Do you think those
view
are
of cops.
systemic, or they're based on stories they've heard from their coworkers, or maybe things they've observed, while on patrol, while on duty?
Well, I think both. I think also as a cop, you observing one person doing something should not mean that you paint a whole community.
Sure,
with
but
that
I mean,
brush,
this is their
so.
entire job. I'm sure they don't make those type of decisions based on one individual.
Well, I hope not. But again, I think that regardless of how many people it is, I think to approach a new situation with a new person negatively or aggressively because of something that's happened in the past, it's just bad policing, in my opinion. And I do think that some of it has to do with systematic racism. I think that Black communities are traditionally over-policed. Like in the States, you see black and white kids use weed at the same rates, but Black people tend to be arrested more for marijuana possession. I don't think, it's because cops are more present in their communities. I don't think you can really argue with that. So I think that is a racial bias.
Do you think that this going in with an open mind or going in calmly should apply to the citizens as well? So if somebody is stopped, if somebody has a traffic stop, do you think that not only the cop should come in with an open mind and not necessarily with their racial bias, but so should the person being stopped?
You can't, you should not approach a cop aggressively. It's probably not going to end well for you considering they have authority. But again, cops are the authority, so they have the responsibility to act accordingly. And I don't think somebody, if you're aggressive, they're probably going to use the force that they need to use in order to do what they have to do. And I don't have any problems with that. It's just when it's excessive.
Yeah, the best way to approach any kind of interaction with the police is to be polite and respectful, but at the same time, don't let them walk all over you, especially if they're infringing on your rights. That's not to say become violent or resist arrest if it comes to that, but afterwards you can take the appropriate legal measures if something inappropriate has happened. But in the moment, you have to understand that police are told that anything could happen in, say, a traffic stop. I mean, violence can escalate very, very quickly. I'm sure you've seen lots of videos. I know I have. So understanding that's very important, but don't let yourself be walked over.
And let's say that your rights are walked over at a traffic stop or a police officer stops you. Then you want to go file a complaint. Do you feel that police really take internal complaints or issues with their own officers seriously?
No, because I'm sure there's a sense of camaraderie. If you
Well, they call it the blue wall of silence.
yeah.
So
Yeah, if you were really serious, you'd get a lawyer, and if it was that big of an issue, I'm sure that it would be resolved that way.
That can be found in any industry, though. Even like, you're working a part-time job, you're going to take the side of you're let's say you're working at Starbucks, you're going to take the side of whatever person is making coffee with you over the side of the customer. It's a sense of camaraderie. It's that they would do it for you, and it's it doesn't even have to go to like covering up something. It could just go to that sense of community, which it can be found in any workforce. So yeah, I mean,
it's
that's
just
why
a
I
bigger
think
deal.
I think
cops.
ideally, if there was complaints going in, that should go to like an unbiased source that can look at it with unbiased viewpoints and unbiased eyes.
It's like the SIU.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how unbiased that could be, but if it is, then yeah, I don't think if they're dealing with a super serious complaint, regardless of who the person is going to be receiving the complaint, I think that there's just going to be some, even if it's subliminal or subconscious, there's going to be some bias held in favor of the wrongful party.
Yeah, I don't think we should necessarily trust the department in question to self-govern or self-police themselves. I mean, the judicial system is separate from the legislative body and the government, because we understand that the government can't necessarily regulate itself all the time if there are abuses of power. So, yeah, I don't think, no. Internal complaints probably mean nothing.
If you go through the justice system, though, aren't there issues with the justice system as well?
Yeah, with like racial, just disparities, I guess. Yeah, there are. And I think it's the same idea with the self-policing.
Mm-hmm.
Like there have been many instances of cops or correctional officers in prisons acting in ways that they shouldn't be and abusing people and assaulting people, and nothing really happens because they're investigating themselves, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of abusing people and investigating themselves, let's talk about the case that was mentioned at the top of the show, which was about Defonte Miller. Do you want to run us through what exactly happened?
So from what I believe happened, this happened in 2016. The trial is just happening now. So he was walking, I think it happened in Pickering, I believe, like in Durham region.
Mm-hmm.
And he lost his eye. So he was walking past a house, and these two brothers were in. One of them was a cop. Were in the garage, and they said they heard a door slam, and their father's truck had been broken into recently. So they assumed it was him because they saw them walking past, and they assaulted him. Like they beat him very badly, and he ended up losing his left eye.
And the two sides are that the brothers say that he had a pipe and he hit the cop's brother on the head with a pipe, but Defonte and his legal team say that he never actually had a pipe and he was never in a position to attack. What's the verdict right now? So they have been charged.
They're on trial. I believe the trial's going on now, which is why it's back in the news.
Mm-hmm. So with issues like this, let's talk about oversight in the moment. Do you think that technology will play a better role in crime scene investigation? We've seen a lot of dash cam video of cops shooting citizens or citizens shooting cops, and many times that footage is manipulated or used for different purposes. Do we feel that technology does help?
Yeah, I think every police officer and their vehicle should be full of cameras. Mm-hmm. I mean, if they serve at the public's leisure, the public's will, they should trust the public enough to show exactly what they're doing. I mean, there's nothing, if they're not doing anything wrong, and we grant them this authority to kill if necessary. It's akin to the military, but with your own citizens. So, yeah, why not? And if it punishes or makes maybe officers more apprehensive in, committing acts of brutality inappropriately, then yeah, why wouldn't you? Why would you oppose it?
Wanted to mention, that the neither the Durham or Toronto police units notified the SIU for months after. So there was a big mishandling there where they didn't really pass it on, and it was obviously something that should have been passed on.
Now let's talk about fighting back, because as you've just mentioned, the police withheld it from SIU. Let's talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, which started in the U.S. What are your thoughts on the movement? The idea was to protect black lives from innocent killings by police, but is that what it is now, or has it become more than that, positively or negatively?
I haven't heard really anything about Black Lives Matter in the U.S. recently. I think starting out, especially in the States, there was, a period where it was just like case after case in the media of unarmed black men being shot and killed by cops. So I think definitely there should have been some sort of movement for that. In Toronto, I think it got a little bit perverted, especially when they stopped Pride and stuff like that. But I think in Canada, it doesn't seem that the violence with cops tends to be fatal as often. I think that just is because most people don't have guns here, so it doesn't need to escalate that far usually, or the cops aren't afraid for their lives. But there is, there is police violence towards people. So I think there could have been some sort of advocacy organization, but I don't know if they handled it well. There's also a lot of black on black violence in urban areas, and I think they should have dealt with that as well.
Now, with what you mentioned of Black Lives Matter stopping Pride Parade, they made a controversy about not having cops attend Pride. Jessica, let's go to you. What do you think about that? Should cops be allowed to attend Pride in uniform?
In Canada or in the States?
Canada.
Canada?
Well, yeah, because the controversy was in Canada.
Yeah. Honestly, the thing is they're going to be there anyway, right?
Just not in uniform?
Well, no, they have to be there to patrol,
yeah,
and, there could be acts of violence from hate groups and whatever. I do understand saying no to them being there, especially if there's just such high violence against black communities, against even especially last year when Bruce McArthur, when that whole case came about, and how the Toronto police were aware of the fact that there was a serial killer within the gay community and somebody attacking gay members of the Toronto community, and they were aware of that, yet they didn't do anything about it until literally it was too late, and there was so many victims that were victims of this serial killer. In that instance, no, I don't think that they should attend, especially for something like the Pride Parade, when there is such there was such negligence and neglect over just your basic police work and what they should have been investigating. For Black Lives Matter, again, I mean, I totally see why saying no for them being there. I get it. I don't really feel like I have have an opinion on whether that's okay or whether it's not okay, because I totally understand the argument for why they shouldn't be there and why a lot of people don't want them there. Comes down to systemic violence and stuff like that, and holding your own, like police officers holding wrongful biases. So no, I don't necessarily think I should be the one. I really have an opinion in that matter, because I do totally see both sides of the argument.
But if it was your opinion, it's just your opinion, your thoughts, should they be allowed?
I don't really have one. Like, I don't know. I don't, honestly.
If you were the decision maker.
That's not going to happen, so why am I going to answer hypothetical?
Because that's part of what we do. We think hypothetically.
It's not my situation to judge in. I'm not a member of either of those communities. I haven't been affected by systemic violence or systemic racism or systemic homophobia. I do see their side, and I would support. Honestly, yeah. If you want to hypothetical, then I would support both communities in their fight against not having them there.
Okay.
But again, it's not my decision to say yes, no. But my support would go
with them.
With the minorities.
Sam, what do you think? Should cops be allowed to be in uniform?
I don't really care at all for Pride, so I think opinion. I don't really care. I mean,
should they be though? Hypothetically,
should they be there?
Should they be allowed to march
to
in
march.
Pride in uniform?
I think, sorry to interrupt, but I think it's up to Pride. Like, Pride is an organization, right? Like Toronto Pride. So I don't know if Black Lives Matter Toronto went about it the right way. I don't necessarily think they should have like stopped the parade and all of that. But I do think that if Pride Toronto decides that they don't want police, they're marching in uniform, then that's their decision. And if they do, they do. Like, I think that's up to the organization.
And what do you think?
I don't really like. I don't really have an opinion. I feel like it doesn't really matter that much. Like Jessica said, there are going to be cops there anyway because they have to be, because it's such a big event. And any gay cop
that's what I was going to ask.
who wants to march, I feel like they will anyway. I'm not sure if there's a lot of people who are gay and really, really want to march in uniform. Sucks for them that they can't now. But yeah, I feel like if you're gay and you're going to go march in Pride, you're going to do that anyway, whether or not you're a cop. And there are going to be cops there to protect people. So I don't think it's that big of an issue. Which is another problem I have with Black Lives Matter Toronto. I feel like they just focus on things that aren't real issues. So I don't think that was necessarily a huge issue to focus on.
What other issues do you think they focus on that aren't issues?
Well, that was mainly the main one. I just wish Black Lives Matter focused more on the Black community as well, rather than just the Black community versus the police.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about then the principal idea of Black Lives Matter was to protect Black people from being innocently killed. Now, the number of lawsuits filed against police has increased over the past 25 years. Why do you think that is? Do you think that part of that has been because of Black Lives Matter, or Black Lives Matter has tailed off of that? But in general, why has there been such an increase?
I think they're connected. I think people knowing their rights more just because of the internet, I think, has also made that happen a lot. I'm sure that before 25 years ago, it was probably worse, the Black interactions with cops. But I think with the internet and stuff like that, people know their rights more. So they know they have grounds for a lawsuit. More people know that. So I think that's why that's happening.
Jessica?
Totally. I think if you are aware of what has been done to you and how that is so not only unethical and problems with that, but totally illegal, then yeah, you're going to have your grounds to sue, as well as with the rise of social media and knowing that you're going to seeing other people's cases that may be similar to yours and seeing their legal outcome. It's going to give you motivation to fight for your rights and feel that you have, especially if it's in Canada, then you have your case law precedent. So you feel like you have solid grounds and the potential of having the same outcome of another individual who has experienced the same systemic racism as you. Going back 25 years ago, if we were in the amount of case, I agree with you, Amara, that it was probably a lot worse 25 years ago than it is today, which shows that there has been some progress, not nearly as much as we need, but there has been some progress. I think if there was the same level of education about individual rights, human rights, as well as a social media spectrum where people could understand what other people have gone through and how they've handled it and how they've dealt with the whole legal legal spectrum of things, as well as having access to basically any court doctrine, then I think there would have been just as equal, if not more, cases within the court system regarding this topic. But that obviously wasn't the case. So I think however many that we're seeing in court right now is pretty relevant, and it shows that people do have rights, and if you're going to be infringed upon, you do have the grounds to be able to fight for the problems that you're facing.
And just to kind of end off the discussion, due to the fact that there have been more lawsuits, and if people feel more able to or empowered to fight for justice, do you see an improvement in policing in Canada, especially with the chief of police now being Black? Do you think that helps?
I don't think the chief of police necessarily being Black helps. He's not, every cop patrolling on the streets, so not really. But I don't know. I would think that cops are probably a little bit more conscious of the things that they say and do, because everyone has a phone now. But I don't know.
Sam?
Do Toronto police, I don't think they have body cams, do
No,
they?
they don't.
They should.
I don't think they do, no.
I think they should. I think that's the best way.
But people say it's expensive.
Oh, that's bullshit. I mean, think about it this way: how much money would they save in unjust, from the police perspectives, lawsuits versus just
No, I agree.
fucking dash cams on their chest? I mean, if it is really expensive, then I would agree with either. I guess it'd be the municipal government allocating more money so they can purchase those things.
Do you think that dash cams infringe, or not dash cams, body cams infringe on people's rights, Jessica?
No.
The
legally,
officers?
no.
No.
Legally, as long as one person who is either filming or recording something is totally aware that there is recording going on, there is no infringement of right, regardless if the other person knows or not. So I'm allowed to legally record this conversation between Amara and I, if we're having a conversation, as long as the party in the conversation is aware that there is recording going on. So that would be me. I'm aware that I'm recording it. She has no grounds to come after me after a privacy invasion.
And the issue would be civilians that the police interact with. I feel like they would
And
like
there would-
that there was
yeah,
a body cam
yeah.
because if anything happens, there'll be evidence of it.
But even so, many times the footage is manipulated. So
yeah,
what?
they turn off their mics or their body cams.
Yeah, just at some point. For example, I mean,
Then
this,
it should be thrown out. If
But
you
I feel
know
like that's
if
a
you know
clear
something has been
indication that
tampered
something
with,
happened. Like, why would you turn off your body
That's a
cam?
tacit admission that you're
Yeah.
you're about to
You're
do
doing
something wrong,
bad.
and that should weigh in on the decision that the court makes. I think,
I agree.
like it, just let it run.
Yeah, why would you turn it off if there was nothing that you had to hide?
and what happens though if it did accidentally turn off and the cop is innocent?
Well, that's court. That would
and you can find if
their
something.
defense would argue
yeah.
that. Sorry.
You can look at technology and see the interface and if it just turned off because of like actual technical failure
Yeah.
or if somebody tampered with it. So, if it was tampered with, that looks bad on you. If it wasn't, then you're going to have to go to the more traditional sources to figure out what course of action to take.
And lastly, do you think that the future of policing in Canada has improved? What kind of changes or improvements do you see hope happening?
Well, I think body cams would be a really good thing. I think every cop should have a body cam on them. I think that's all you can really hope for. You hope that the people who are becoming cops as we move on are more socially aware. And again, you don't have to be socially aware or sensitive, just not racist. It's not really a big ask. So I hope that with, I guess, more diversity and stuff like that, people are more exposed to people of different backgrounds and they're not racist when they become cops.
Jessica?
I'd have to say the same thing. I think racism and homophobia and all, the areas of discrimination, they come from an area, I think I've said this before, they come from an area of education. In ignorance, exactly. So, you have to start with education and not necessarily just sensitivity training, but start with education on those areas, and then to hope to see a reduction in areas of violence against targeted groups.
And Sam?
I would like body cameras implemented. I think that's the best and quickest way you could, decrease police brutality or violence.
Well, that's our show for this week. Clearly, we kept things civil, as our
Like
civil
you should
duty.
do when you approach police officers, or when
And
they approach you.
should do when they approach you.
Yeah, but they have the gun. Pick your battles.
Of course.
That's what I'm saying.
Because just bring the battle to court after.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. And that's where we end off, actually. That was our show for this week. Thank you to everyone that tuned in and completed our poll. 104 people. That's huge. Thank you to every single person. Brand new episode of the Raben Report will be coming to you next week. Same day, same time, same people. Have a great day, everyone.